the moment that changed everything. From the very first second, something felt different. People often say that stories about famous actors are exaggerated, shaped for headlines, or twisted for attention. But this one did not begin with rumors or gossip. It began with a single moment, quiet yet powerful, that would redefine everything people thought they knew about Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves. And it all started on a day neither of them expected. A day that carried a weight so heavy it felt like the air itself was trying to warn them that life was about to shift. The sun was setting over the Pacific Ocean, painting the sky with soft orange and fading pink. Sandra Bullock stood on the balcony of a remote retreat house she rented for a short break. She had been working nonstop, and exhaustion had built up like layers of dust on her heart. It was not just work. It was grief, loneliness, unfinished memories, and questions she never learned how to silence. The world saw her as strong, unshakable, always smiling, but inside she was tired, so tired. She held a cup of warm tea close to her chest and breathed deeply, hoping the warmth would soothe the heaviness inside her. But something else weighed on her more than anything else, a message she had received earlier that morning. It was simple, quiet, almost humble, yet it carried an emotional punch she wasn't prepared for, because the message came from only one person who could still catch her off guard after all these years. It was from Keanu Reeves. She had not spoken to him in months. They drifted in and out of each other's lives in a rhythm that felt both natural and painful, like a song that never finishes its last note. Their connection was real but undefined, profound yet unspoken, gentle yet full of unsolved tension. They had always been close, even when the world twisted their friendship into wild stories. But this message, it felt different. Keanu's words were soft but strangely urgent. "Sandy, I need to see you. It's important. It's something I should have told you years ago." Her heart had skipped a beat when she read it. Important? Years ago? What truth could he possibly be holding on to for so long? And why now? Sandra tried to calm her mind, but her thoughts spiraled into an emotional storm. She replayed their shared moments from decades of friendship, the laughter, the quiet talks after long shoots, the inside jokes, the way he always showed up when she least expected anyone to care. But she also remembered the moments that hurt, the times she wondered what would have happened if they had chosen each other, the times she convinced herself that life had simply moved in different directions. She wondered if he ever felt the same ache she sometimes carried when she thought about what could have been. Now suddenly he wanted to talk, face to face. As she watched the sun drop lower behind the ocean, she whispered to herself, "Why now, Keanu? What are you not telling me?" While Sandra tried to calm her thoughts, miles away Keanu Reeves sat in the back of a quiet car headed toward the coastline. He leaned his head against the window, watching the blurred lights pass like ghosts of old memories. His chest felt tight, not from fear, but from the weight of something he had carried for too long, something he had never said out loud, something that had kept him awake more nights than he liked to admit. He had rehearsed his words again and again, but they still didn't fit together. How do you confess something that could change a friendship built on trust, respect, and years of unspoken understanding? How do you reveal the truth about a moment so deeply personal, so emotionally heavy, that even remembering it made his voice tremble? Keanu closed his eyes and tried to steady his breath. He knew tonight mattered. He knew Sandra deserved the truth, and he knew he was already years late in saying it. As the car drove along the coastline road, Keanu remembered the moment everything changed, a moment the world never knew about, a moment that still lived inside him like a locked box he never dared to open, a moment tied to a secret he promised himself he would protect until the day someone asked him not to. But Sandra never asked. She simply trusted him, and that trust made the weight even heavier. He ran a hand through his hair and whispered, "I should have told you back then. I should have said something before it was too late." The driver glanced at him through the rearview mirror but said nothing. Keanu appreciated that silence. He needed it, because tomorrow everything could be different. Tomorrow the truth would no longer belong only to him. Meanwhile, Sandra walked back inside the retreat house and paced the living room, her heartbeat echoing louder than her footsteps. She felt a strange mix of fear, anticipation, and curiosity. She knew Keanu well enough to understand that if he called something important, it wasn't something small. He wasn't someone who played with emotions or created drama. He was thoughtful, gentle, deeply respectful, and he carried his emotions quietly, almost too quietly. She sat on the edge of the couch, her hands trembling slightly. "What if it's something bad?" she whispered. "What if he's sick? What if something happened?" But another thought slipped into her mind, a thought she tried to ignore, a thought that scared her more than anything else. What if the truth was something she had waited her entire life to hear? The retreat house felt too quiet, almost painfully so. She stood up again, unable to sit still. She walked toward the kitchen, then turned back. She walked toward the window, then turned away again. Her thoughts kept circling the same question: what truth could possibly shake him this much? Keanu finally arrived near the retreat house. He asked the driver to stop a little farther down the road. He needed a moment to gather himself before he saw her. The wind was cool as he stepped out, carrying the scent of the ocean. The sky had darkened, leaving only faint streaks of twilight behind the horizon. He walked slowly up the path, each step feeling heavier than the last. He thought about the promise he made, a promise that had stayed buried for more than a decade. A promise that now demanded to come out. A promise he could no longer keep. Inside, Sandra heard footsteps approaching. Her heart pounded so hard she felt it in her throat. She took a deep breath, her hands tightening at her sides, trying to prepare herself for whatever was about to happen. The doorbell rang. She froze. The sound echoed through the quiet house like a signal that life had just turned a corner, and there was no going back. When Sandra finally opened the door, Keanu stood there, his expression calm but his eyes telling a different story. A story of worry, regret, and something else she couldn't name yet. "Keanu," she whispered. He took a slow breath and looked directly into her eyes, his voice soft but trembling. "Sandy, before I say anything, I need you to be ready, because what I'm about to tell you, it changes everything." Her breath caught. "What do you mean?" Keanu swallowed hard, his gaze dropping for a moment before meeting hers again. "It's about our past," he said quietly, "and something that happened, something we never talked about, something you don't remember." Sandra felt the world tilt slightly under her feet. "Not remember," Keanu continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sandy, there was a day, a moment, and a promise made between us. And that moment, it made us something we never admitted to anyone, not even ourselves." Her chest tightened. "Keanu, what are you talking about?" He stepped closer, his eyes filled with something deep and painful. "I need to tell you the truth," he said. "The whole truth. Because years ago, you and we did something that no one knows about. Not the media, not our friends, not even you." Sandra's breath shook. "Then tell me," she whispered. "Tell me what really happened." Keanu looked at her with a mixture of fear and tenderness. And then he said the words that made her knees weaken. "Sandy, there was a night when you and we got married." Silence. Absolute silence. The kind that cuts through the air like a blade. Sandra's eyes widened, her heartbeat slamming against her ribs. That's impossible. I would remember something like that." Keanu lowered his head, his voice trembling. "You don't remember because of what happened afterward, because of the accident, because of the promise I made." Her eyes narrowed. "Accident? What accident? Keanu, what are you talking about?" He looked up at her again, tears gathering in his eyes. "Sandy, you forgot everything from that night. And I promised I would never bring it up unless it came back to you on its own." Sandra stepped back, her breath uneven. Why would I forget? What happened to me? What happened to us?" Keanu inhaled shakily. "That's what I'm here to tell you," he whispered. "And the truth, it's going to break your heart." Sandra's voice cracked. "Then tell me." Keanu took a long breath, steadying himself. "I will," he said softly. "But once I start, nothing will ever be the same again." And just as he was about to speak, a loud crash echoed from outside the house. Sandra flinched. Keanu's eyes widened. And before either of them could react, the lights flickered, and went out the night everything was hidden. The darkness that swallowed the house felt unnatural, as if it didn't come from a simple power failure but from something deeper, something connected to the very truth Keanu was trying to reveal. For a moment, Sandra stood in the silence, unable to breathe properly. The air felt heavier, almost pressing against her chest. She turned slowly toward Keanu, trying to read his expression through the dim glow of the moonlight passing through the windows. She could barely see his face, but she heard his breath unsteady, controlled, as if he was fighting something inside himself. She whispered, "Keanu, what was that?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped slightly closer to her, instinctively placing himself between her and the door, as if protecting her from something unknown. It was a familiar gesture, one she had seen from him countless times on movie sets, during long nights, during moments when life felt fragile. But now it felt different, real, urgent. Finally, he murmured, "Sandy, stay close. I didn't expect the power to go out right when we started talking." She nodded slowly, but fear began creeping inside her, coiling around her thoughts. The last thing she needed in that moment was another mystery, another layer of tension added to the truth she was barely ready to hear. The house was silent except for the distant ocean waves crashing against the rocks. The darkness made everything echo, her heartbeat, the wind against the windows, and the memories she didn't know she had. She tried to calm herself but couldn't shake the feeling that something else was happening, something connected to the truth Keanu had carried for so long. Keanu walked toward a small drawer near the entrance, searching for a flashlight. His silhouette moved with quiet urgency, and Sandra felt a strange mixture of fear and familiarity watching him. He had always been steady, always calm, always gentle, even in chaos. But tonight, even he seemed unsettled. When he found the flashlight, he clicked it on and a soft beam cut through the darkness. Sandra blinked at the sudden light. Keanu glanced back at her, his voice low. "I'm here, don't worry." Though his words tried to comfort her, she could see the tension in his eyes, the same tension that had been growing since he arrived. Sandra swallowed hard. "Keanu, you said we got married." The words still felt impossible to speak. The idea was too big, too shocking, too unreal. She didn't know how to hold it, how to fit it into her memory, how to understand something she didn't even remember happening. Keanu turned the flashlight toward the floor and approached her slowly. "Yes," he whispered, "we did." She shook her head. "That doesn't make sense. How, when, why would it be secret? Why didn't we tell anyone? Why didn't we remember it together?" Keanu hesitated, his jaw tightening slightly. "Sandy, I promise I'm going to explain everything. But I need you to know, this is not a story about two actors doing something reckless. It's not a scandal. It's not something we hid for publicity. It's something that happened between two people who were hurting and healing and trying to find comfort in a world that kept tearing them apart." Her breath trembled. "What happened to me that night? You said there was an accident." Keanu nodded slowly. "There was." Sandra's eyes filled with a mixture of fear and confusion. "Please, please just tell me." Keanu took a deep breath and finally began. "It was years ago," he said, voice low, heavy with memory. "We had finished a long shoot together. It was one of those days when everything felt overwhelming. You were going through one of the hardest moments of your life. I was dealing with my own grief. We both felt empty, and after filming late into the night, we stayed behind on the set." He paused, his eyes drifting as he revisited a time he had avoided remembering. "We talked, really talked. Not as actors, not as friends, but as two broken people trying to lift each other. And then we laughed. We laughed so hard we cried. And somewhere in that moment, something clicked. Something fell into place between us, something that had been there for years but never spoken." Sandra listened, her heart pounding. Her mind tried to picture it, but the memory remained a blank wall. Keanu continued. "We walked out of the studio, still laughing, and found ourselves wandering through the empty streets. It was raining. You said the rain made you feel free, that it washed everything heavy away." He smiled softly, painfully. "I remember that moment like it happened yesterday. You were dancing in the street, soaking wet, telling me life felt too short to keep waiting for perfect timing." Sandra felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. She didn't remember it, but she could imagine herself doing something like that, something spontaneous, something wild, something that felt like reclaiming a tiny piece of joy in a world that often refused to give any. Keanu's voice softened even more. "We ended up at a small chapel. It was open. The lights were warm. It felt safe. You said you wanted to do something crazy, something beautiful, something just for us. And then you took my hand and said, 'Let's get married, not for the world, not for the cameras, not for the stories, just for us. Just so life feels like it finally makes sense for one night.'" Sandra's breath froze. Keanu looked directly into her eyes, and I said yes. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her heart pounded so heavily she felt dizzy. "We were laughing," he said quietly, "but we were also crying. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a performance. It was two people who cared about each other deeply, giving themselves one night of peace." Her eyes filled with tears. "But Keanu, how could I forget something like that? How could my mind just erase it?" Keanu's face darkened with painful memory. "Because when we left the chapel," he said, "we got into a car accident." Sandra's breath caught. What kind of accident? A truck came out of nowhere, Keanu whispered. We were hit on the passenger side. You lost consciousness. You woke up hours later in the hospital, confused, shaken, terrified. The doctors said the memory loss was temporary. But when the memories didn't come back, I made a decision. What decision? Her voice cracked. I promised you I wouldn't bring that night up unless your memory returned naturally. You begged me not to tell you anything that would confuse you. You said you didn't want pieces of a life you couldn't remember forced back into your mind. Sandra felt her knees weaken. So you just kept it inside all these years? Keanu nodded. It was the hardest promise I ever kept. She covered her mouth with both hands. Tears escaped her eyes and dropped onto the floor. Keanu, why didn't you tell me when things felt different between us? Why didn't you say something when we were drifting apart? Why didn't you? He cut her off gently, stepping closer. Because I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to push something on you that your heart wasn't ready to remember. And because every time I looked at you, I remembered that night. I remembered holding your hands. I remembered us promising to always protect each other from pain, and not telling you felt like keeping that promise. Sandra shook her head slowly, overwhelmed. I don't know what to feel, I don't know what to say. Keanu's voice broke slightly. Sandy, I didn't come here to make you feel lost. I came here because something happened recently, something that made me realize I can't keep this inside anymore. She wiped her tears. What happened? Keanu opened his mouth to answer. But suddenly the entire house shook. The windows rattled violently. The ground trembled beneath them. Sandra gasped and grabbed Keanu's arm. What was that? She cried. Keanu's eyes widened, the flashlight shaking in his hand. And then, the sound of a car skidding outside sliced through the night. Keanu ran to the window and looked out. His face went pale. Sandra rushed beside him. Down the narrow road leading to the house. A car had crashed into the trees. Keanu whispered, voice filled with terror. Sandy, someone followed us here, the past that refused to stay hidden. The moment Sandra saw the crashed car through the window, her entire body froze. It wasn't just fear. It was disbelief mixed with an instinct that told her this was no coincidence. The headlights flickered weakly, barely illuminating the broken branches around the vehicle. Her breath caught in her throat as she whispered, Keanu, please tell me this isn't what it looks like. Keanu didn't answer. He stared at the wreck with eyes filled not just with fear but with recognition. Something about the situation tightened his expression, and Sandra could feel it. He knew something she didn't. The silence stretched between them like a thin thread ready to snap. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows harder than before. The crashed car looked like it had appeared out of nowhere, like a warning dropped at their doorstep. Finally, Keanu exhaled slowly. Sandy, I think someone has been watching me these last few days. I ignored it. I thought I was imagining things, but this... His voice trailed off as he stepped back from the window. Sandra placed a trembling hand on his arm. Keanu, why would anyone follow you to this place, to a private house nobody knows about? Keanu swallowed hard. Because of what I came here to tell you, because of that night, and because... He paused again, struggling to find the right words. Because someone else knew about the wedding. Sandra's heart dropped. What? The flashlight trembled slightly in his hand. I wasn't the only one who saw us enter the chapel that night. For a moment, Sandra didn't speak. She couldn't. The idea that another person knew about a night she couldn't remember, a night that changed everything, made her stomach twist. Keanu, who? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Keanu glanced toward the door before answering, as if expecting someone to burst in. A photographer. He wasn't trying to expose us at first. He was outside because he was covering another event. He saw us walk into the chapel. He followed. He took photos. He saw the ceremony. His voice grew heavier with each sentence. He saw us say the vows. Sandra felt the room tilt again, as if the floor beneath her no longer belonged to reality. And you never told me someone photographed us? Why didn't he release the pictures? Why didn't he tell anyone? Keanu looked down. Because I made a deal with him. The shock on her face was immediate. A deal. Keanu nodded. I told him you were going through something painful at that time, and I begged him not to expose anything. He agreed. He said he would keep the photos locked away, and for years he did. He kept his promise, but recently he contacted me again. Sandra's heartbeat quickened. Why now? Keanu's jaw tightened, because he said someone reached out to him, someone who wanted those photos, someone willing to pay for them. Sandra covered her mouth, horrified. But who? Who would want to reveal something so personal, something I didn't even know happened? Keanu shook his head slowly. I don't know yet, but the photographer sounded terrified when he called me. He said he felt watched. He said someone broke into his office, and then he vanished. Disappeared, no traces. Sandra felt a cold shiver run through her spine as the pieces connected in her mind. You think the person who followed him followed you too? Keanu nodded, and now they're here. The house suddenly felt smaller, the silence loud enough to choke them. Sandra looked back toward the window where the crashed car remained still, almost too still, like a trap waiting for movement. She took a shaky step backward. Keanu, what if whoever is in that car isn't hurt? What if they're waiting for us to come outside? Keanu gently grabbed her hand and pulled her away from the window. That's why we're staying inside. We don't know who it is or what they want. Sandra's voice trembled. But if someone has the photos, that means they know everything. And if they followed you here, they know you came to tell me. Keanu's expression softened with guilt. That's why I didn't want to wait anymore. I couldn't keep the truth from you any longer. And now, we have no choice but to face whatever this is together. She stared at him, overwhelmed by fear, confusion, and a deep ache inside her chest. Keanu, why did you wait until now to tell me everything? Why today? What changed? He hesitated for a long moment before answering. Because 2 nights ago, I received an envelope at my home. No name, no address, nothing. Inside, there was a single photograph. Sandra held her breath. Keanu closed his eyes briefly before continuing. It was from that night, from the chapel. It showed you in your dress, smiling, holding my hands. It was the moment before we said the vows. His voice cracked slightly. The person who sent it wrote one sentence on the back. He opened his eyes and looked at her with pain she had never seen in him before. They wrote, she deserves to know the truth before I tell her myself. Sandra felt a cold wave of fear wash over her. What does that mean? Why would someone threaten to tell me something so personal? Who would even want to hurt us like this? Keanu shook his head. I don't know, but whoever it is, they're not doing this out of kindness. They're doing this to control the story, to twist it, to hurt us. The sound of footsteps outside made Sandra gasp. Keanu held her arm tightly, pulling her closer. They both turned their heads toward the door. The flashlight beam shook as Keanu lifted it toward the entrance. Another step. And another. Slow, deliberate, approaching. Sandra whispered, Keanu, we're not safe here. He nodded, his voice barely audible. I know. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Everything went silent. The ocean waves, the wind, the rattling branches. All of it disappeared into a heavy stillness that pressed against their chests. Keanu tightened his grip on the flashlight. Sandra held her breath. Then, a soft knock echoed through the house. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not loud, not rushed, controlled, as if the person on the other side already knew they were being listened to. Keanu and Sandra stared at the door without moving. Then the knocks came again. But this time, a voice followed. A voice that made Sandra's heart drop into her stomach. I know you're both inside, the voice said calmly, and we need to talk now. Sandra whispered, trembling, Keanu, who is that? Keanu's face turned pale. It's him, he said softly, the photographer. Sandra's eyes widened. And if he's here, then something is very, very wrong. The truth inside the shadows. The voice outside the door sent a chill straight down Sandra's spine. She felt the air around her thicken, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Keanu didn't move at first. He stood completely still, his body slightly angled in front of her, as if some instinct inside him demanded he shield her from whatever waited outside. Even in the dim glow of the flashlight, she could see a conflict rising inside him. Fear, recognition, something else she couldn't name. The voice came again, a little heavier this time, a little more tired. Keanu, Sandra, please open the door. I don't want to hurt anyone. He didn't sound like a threat. He sounded exhausted, like a man who had been running for far too long. But tired men could be dangerous too. Sandra tightened her hand around Keanu's arm. Keanu, if he's the photographer, why is he here? Why follow us? Why crash his car? Keanu's eyes stayed locked on the door. Because if he's here, then someone forced him to come. The way he said it, quiet, slow, certain, made Sandra's breath catch. She whispered, "Forced? What do you mean?" Keanu finally turned to her, his voice low. "Sandy, the man who photographed us, wasn't a bad person. He was scared when he took the photos. Scared when I found him. Scared when he agreed to hide everything. And when he called me a few days ago, he sounded even more terrified. Whoever wanted those photos, whoever pressured him, they're not doing it for a story. They want something else." Sandra's chest tightened. "But what could anyone want from us? A secret wedding picture isn't worth this." Keanu looked at her with a mix of regret and truth. "It's not the photos they want. It's the promise you and I made that night." Her breath stopped for a moment. "Promise? What promise?" His expression changed slightly, a sadness she didn't understand yet. "I'll tell you, I promise, but right now we need to know if he's alone." Another knock echoed through the quiet room, softer this time, almost desperate. "Please," the voice whispered, "they're coming." That single sentence froze both Sandra and Keanu completely. Sandra's heartbeat roared in her ears. "Keanu, what does he mean, who's coming?" Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he slowly approached the window beside the door, staying low so he wouldn't be seen. He moved quietly but with intention, like someone who had been trained to stay calm even when everything around him was falling apart. He peeked through the side of the curtain, careful not to move it too much. What he saw made his shoulders stiffen. He whispered, "There's another car at the bottom of the hill." Sandra felt her stomach twist. "Who is it?" "I don't know," Keanu said softly. "But the headlights are off, they're not moving, someone is watching." The fear inside Sandra grew heavier, but she fought to steady her breath. "Keanu, if the photographer is in danger, we can't just leave him outside." Keanu hesitated. He wasn't afraid for himself, she knew that. He was afraid for her, always for her, even when she didn't remember the most important night of their lives. He finally whispered, "I'll open the door, but you stand back." She grabbed his arm tightly. "Be careful." He nodded once, then stepped toward the door and placed his hand slowly on the handle. The moment stretched painfully, a long, silent second where both of them wondered if opening that door would bring answers or danger. He pulled the door open just enough to look outside. The photographer stood there, trembling, soaked from the mist, his clothes torn as if he'd been dragged through the forest. His face was pale, his eyes frantic, scanning the darkness behind him. Keanu opened the door wider. "Get inside now." The man stumbled in, almost collapsing onto the floor. He clutched his side, wheezing as if he had been running for miles. Sandra knelt beside him instinctively, her voice gentle despite her fear. "Are you hurt? What happened?" The man shook his head wildly. "You don't understand. I shouldn't have come. They followed me. They know." Keanu crouched in front of him, his tone firm but not unkind. "Who followed you?" The man's broken breath trembled in the air. "I don't know their names. I don't know what they want. But they said if I didn't bring them to you, they'd ruin everything." Sandra felt a cold wave move down her back. "Why us? Why now?" The man looked at her, fear swimming in his eyes. "Because of what you did the night you two got married." Sandra's heart stuttered, "But I don't even remember that night." The man nodded. "And that's exactly why they think they can control the story. They know there's a gap in your memory. They know Keanu kept the promise. And they believe if they reveal the truth before Keanu does, they can twist it." Keanu's jaw tightened. "Twist what? What do they want?" The man's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible. "They want the second vow." Sandra blinked, confusion washed over her face. "The second vow? What vow? What is he talking about?" Keanu didn't answer. His silence was enough for Sandra to understand that he knew exactly what the photographer meant. She placed a hand on his arm, her voice trembling. "Keanu, what second vow?" Keanu closed his eyes slowly, pain visible in every line of his face. "Sandy, there was a vow we made after the marriage vow, something only you and I and the person who married us heard." She stared at him, shocked. But why would anyone care about a personal vow? The photographer sucked in a sharp breath. Because that vow didn't stay personal, someone else recorded it. Keanu's eyes shot open. "That's impossible," he whispered. "No one else was inside the chapel." The photographer shook his head, tears lining his eyes. "Someone was hiding in the back. Someone filmed everything. And that vow isn't just personal. It's something they think will change how the world sees both of you. Sandra felt her throat tighten. What did we say, Keanu? Please tell me. Keanu took her hands in his touch trembling. Sandy, the second vow was something you asked for, something raw, something honest, something the world wouldn't understand without context. Her voice cracked. Tell me. Keanu opened his mouth to speak. But the photographer suddenly gasped, grabbing his chest. Keanu leaned toward him. What's wrong? What's happening? The photographer's eyes widened in terror. They're here. Before Sandra or Keanu could react, the front door, the same door Keanu had just locked, shook violently. One strike. Two. Three. The whole house trembled under the force. Sandra clutched Keanu's arm. Keanu pulled her behind him, his heartbeat pounding through the silence. The photographer whispered with his last ounce of breath. Don't open it. If you do, everything you think you know will fall apart. And then, the door burst open the night the truth stepped inside. The door flew open with such force that Sandra felt the floor tremble beneath her feet. The wind rushed into the house like a living shadow, cold, fast, unsettling. For a moment, she couldn't see anything beyond the blinding contrast of darkness and the beam of Keanu's trembling flashlight. All she heard was the photographer's ragged breathing behind her, and her own heart pounding like it was trying to escape her chest. Keanu's arm instinctively stretched across her, protecting her even before his mind could register what was happening. His shoulders stiffened, his breath steadying, every muscle preparing for whatever or whoever had broken inside. The silhouette in the doorway stepped forward. Slow, controlled, unafraid. Sandra's breath shallowed as the shape took form in the dim light. Tall, dark jacket, soaked hair, but the face, she couldn't see it yet. Keanu raised the flashlight, the beam slicing through the darkness. Stop right there, he said quietly, his voice calm but edged with something protective, something powerful. The intruder didn't listen. Instead, he lifted both hands slowly, palms open, showing he had no weapon. His voice was steady when he spoke. I'm not here to hurt anyone. But Sandra heard something strange in his tone, like sorrow buried under fatigue. Keanu took a step forward. Who are you? The man exhaled softly. My name is Daniel Care. The photographer behind them choked on his own breath. Sandra turned, startled. The fear in his eyes doubled. No, the photographer whispered. Not you, not you. Keanu looked between them, confused. You know him. The photographer nodded weakly. He's the one who bought the photos, his voice cracked. He's the one who threatened me. Sandra's stomach tightened painfully. She stared at the man standing in front of them. Daniel stepped deeper into the room, but he did not close the door behind him, as if he wanted them to see there was no one else waiting outside. That's not true, Daniel said softly, his gaze falling on the trembling photographer. I didn't threaten you, I tried to warn you. Warn me about what? The photographer snapped, voice trembling. You followed me for days, you showed up at my home, you demanded the photos. I demanded you destroy them, Daniel corrected quietly. The room fell into stunned silence. Keanu lowered the flashlight slightly, confusion clouding his face. Why would you want them destroyed? Daniel stepped closer, his expression pained. Because someone else wants them, someone far worse than me, someone who doesn't care who gets hurt as long as they control the truth. Sandra swallowed hard. Then who are you working for? Why were you involved at all? Daniel shook his head with a heavy sigh. I'm not working for anyone, I'm trying to stop them. I was the assistant of the photographer who filmed your second vow. He's gone now, disappeared, and I think the same people who scared him are coming after all of you. Keanu's voice sharpened. And who exactly are they? Daniel hesitated, the weight of the answer heavy in his eyes. They're not from Hollywood, he said. They're not fans, they're not paparazzi. They're a group that collects private material on high-profile people, not to expose them, but to control them, to manipulate them, to push them in directions they want. Sandra's pulse quickened. A blackmail group. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. The photographer behind them groaned, holding his side. I told you they'd come. Sandra turned back to Daniel, her voice shaking. But why us? Why would they care about me and Keanu? Daniel took a deep breath and met her eyes. Because that night, your vow wasn't just romantic. It wasn't just emotional. You both said something that, if taken out of context, can be twisted into something political, something damaging, something people could misinterpret on a massive scale. Keanu frowned, stunned. Political, Sandy and I never. Daniel raised a hand. Let me finish. He stepped closer, his voice softening. After you exchanged vows, Sandra, you said something very vulnerable, something about wanting to protect Keanu from people who kept taking advantage of his kindness. You said he deserved a world where no one controlled him or used him. And Keanu, you responded with your own vow. Keanu blinked, memories flickering painfully in his eyes. I said I'd protect her, always, no matter the cost. Daniel nodded slowly. But the person filming, they twisted it. They edited the clip to sound like a pact, like an agreement to expose people in the industry, like a promise to speak out together. But it wasn't anything like that. It was two hurting souls making a personal promise in a vulnerable moment. Sandra felt a tear roll down her cheek. And someone wants to use that against us. Daniel shook his head. They want to own it. They want to hold it over you. They want both of you in their pocket. Keanu clenched his fists, anger simmering beneath his calm voice. And you came here to help, to warn us. Daniel nodded. Yes, they're on their way. I crashed the car trying to outrun them. I have the only remaining copy of the real video, the unedited one, with proof it was tampered with, and I need to give it to you before they take it. Sandra wiped her tears, confusion swirling through her. Why risk yourself? Why protect us? Daniel's voice broke. Because my father was the man who filmed your wedding. Silence fell across the room like a heavy curtain. Sandra's breath hitched. Your father? Daniel nodded slowly, pain filling his eyes. He filmed everything that night, the vows, the kiss, the accident, and he always regretted it. He told me your moment was the purest thing he ever captured and the biggest mistake he ever made. Keanu whispered, where is he now? Daniel swallowed hard. Gone, they took him. Sandra felt the world tilt again. Took him. Daniel nodded, and they're coming for all of us next. Before anyone could speak again, a sharp sound pierced the silence. Tires screeching. Gravel shifting. Doors slamming shut. 3 sets of footsteps approached the house, fast, heavy, purposeful. Keanu grabbed Sandra's hand. The photographer wheezed in panic. Daniel's face drained of color. A cold voice spoke from outside. Bring us the video, and no one gets hurt. Keanu positioned himself in front of Sandra. She clutched his arm, whispering, Keanu, what do we do? Keanu looked into her eyes and whispered back. We don't let them take our truth. And then, the living room window shattered behind them, the vow that survived everything. The sound of the shattering window exploded through the house, spraying glass like a burst of cold stars across the floor. Sandra flinched, her heart racing in her chest, the shock shaking through her bones. Keanu moved instantly, pulling her down and shielding her with his body as shards fell around them. The wind roared through the broken frame, carrying in the smell of damp earth and something sharper, the scent of danger. Daniel stumbled back, clutching his backpack to his chest, the one he had said contained the original video. The photographer crawled toward a corner, gasping, desperate to get out of the way. The room felt too small, too dark, too full of fear. Sandra's breath came fast, uneven, but she forced her eyes open, refusing to let panic swallow her. Keanu rose slowly, placing himself in front of her again. There was no anger in his eyes, only calm determination and a quiet strength she had seen in him many times before. He picked up a piece of the broken wood from the shattered window frame, holding it like a makeshift shield. Stay behind me, he whispered. Sandra squeezed his arm, her voice trembling but steady. I'm not leaving you. Footsteps approached from outside, controlled, confident, unhurried. Whoever was coming knew they held the upper hand. The front door creaked under pressure. Daniel clutched his backpack tighter, whispering, they can't get this. If they get it, everything will be twisted. You'll be trapped. The door handle turned slowly. Keanu took a step forward. But before whoever was outside could push in, Daniel suddenly moved. He grabbed the heavy wooden chair near the kitchen and wedged it under the doorknob, blocking it just as the intruders shoved violently from the other side. The door rattled. Sandra gasped. Daniel wiped cold sweat from his forehead. That won't hold for long. The windows around them shook again. It was clear. The intruders weren't leaving without what they came for. Keanu turned to Daniel. Is there another way out, a back door, a side exit? Daniel nodded. Through the kitchen, down a small hill into the forest. They won't see you from the road. The photographer coughed painfully. Go before they break in. But Sandra shook her head. We can't leave you, you'll be hurt. The photographer managed a weak smile. I've been running for days, I can hide, they don't care about me, just about that video, take it, go. Daniel looked between Sandra and Keanu, then slowly pulled the small camera drive from his backpack. It was barely the size of a thumb, but it felt heavier than anything Sandra had ever seen. This is the truth, he whispered. The full night, the vows, the accident, the real version. With this, they can't twist anything. No one can ever use it against you. Keanu took the drive carefully. We'll keep it safe. Daniel nodded, relief washing over his face. Good, now go run, they're almost in. The house shook again as the intruders slammed their shoulders into the door. The chair under the handle cracked, splinters flying across the room. Keanu grabbed Sandra's hand firmly. Come on. They ran toward the kitchen, Daniel following close behind. The photographer stayed hidden in the far corner, whispering a shaky goodbye as they passed. Sandra's heart pounded in her ears as they reached the back door. Keanu pushed it open and stepped outside into the freezing night air. The ocean wind whipped across them, and the distant crash of waves sounded like a warning. Down the hill, Daniel whispered, Go now. Keanu nodded, guiding Sandra down the steep slope behind the house. Their shoes slipped on damp soil, branches scratching their arms as they half ran, half slid through the darkness. Behind them, the house door finally splintered open. Voices roared inside. Sandra didn't look back. She held onto Keanu with both hands, trusting him completely. He held her steady each time she stumbled, never letting her fall. They reached the bottom of the hill where the trees thickened into a dark forest. Daniel caught up with them, panting heavily. We should separate, he gasped. If they find us, they can't take the truth from all three of us. Keanu shook his head. No, we stay together. Daniel tried again. Keanu. No. His voice held a firmness that ended the argument instantly. They continued deeper into the forest until the lights of the retreat house faded behind them. Finally, after what felt like endless minutes of running, they stopped near a fallen log. Keanu helped Sandra sit, brushing leaves from her hair. She leaned into him, exhausted, trembling from fear and adrenaline. Daniel crouched nearby, catching his breath. They'll search the house first, then the woods, but we bought ourselves a little time. Keanu pulled the camera drive from his pocket and stared at it under the faint moonlight. This could ruin us if anyone gets the wrong version. Daniel nodded. But now you have the real truth, and if anything happens to me, at least you're protected. Sandra looked at Keanu, her voice barely audible. Keanu, what were the vows, the real ones? I need to know. Keanu held her hand gently. You said that you never wanted to see me used by the world again, that you didn't want my kindness to be taken advantage of, that you wished you could protect me the way I protect everyone else. He paused. And I said I would spend the rest of my life making sure you never felt alone again. Sandra felt tears fill her eyes. And the accident after the vows. Keanu's voice softened. We were laughing, we were happy, we were talking about how strange and beautiful the moment felt. Then the truck hit us. Everything went blurry, and when you woke up, you didn't remember. Sandra lowered her head, tears falling freely. How could something so important slip away from me? Keanu brushed a tear from her cheek. Because you were hurt, because your mind protected you, and because I promised I wouldn't bring the memories back if they caused you pain. She leaned into his chest, her voice trembling. Thank you for protecting me all this time. Keanu wrapped his arms around her gently. I always will. Daniel watched them quietly, something bittersweet in his eyes. The danger isn't over yet, but at least now you have the truth. Sandra lifted her head. What do we do now? Keanu stood slowly, helping her to her feet. We go to the authorities, we give them the real video, we expose the blackmail group before they expose us. Daniel nodded. It's the only way. Sandra took Keanu's hand. I'm with you, no matter how hard this gets, I'm not running from the truth anymore. Keanu smiled softly, warmth returning to his eyes. Then let's finish this together. Before they could take another step, the faint sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing louder, approaching fast. Daniel's eyes widened. That's them, the police. Keanu exhaled in relief. Good, we'll tell them everything. Sandra squeezed his hand tighter. The three of them stepped out of the forest, walking toward the sound of safety, the truth in Keanu's pocket, and a future no longer built on silence or fear. When the police arrived, flashing lights washing over them, Keanu looked at Sandra with a tenderness she finally understood. The vow they made that lost night wasn't just a memory. It was alive. And from that moment on, they faced the world together, honest, fearless, and stronger than ever.